Today's episode, we talk about eating disorders and how a lot of the tips that some non-professionally trained people give on social media are actually eating disorders in disguise, so to say. A lot of the things out there, eating next to nothing, under 1,200, 1,400 calories, exercising too much, that actually may be lending people to struggle with eating disorders that they may not even realize they have. We're going to talk about that and more in today's episode of It Starts with Attraction. I'm joined today by Dr. Cristina Castagnini, and she is trained. She earned her bachelor's in psychology. She has a clinical psych master's from Pepperdine University and her PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Southern California. She has been working with people who've experienced eating disorders or are currently struggling with eating disorders for several years now. And she's incredibly passionate about helping people break free from that. Let's dive into today's episode. Cristina, I am so excited for you to be joining my audience today and talking about eating disorders, talking about body image issues, because that's probably, I should ask you, do you see that becoming more and more prevalent as Instagram and social media become even more prevalent in our society and culture?
I do. And I'm not quite sure if it's just due to social media or if we're just we're talking about it more. Like I know, over time, like for instance, there just wasn't much known or talked about eating disorders, and there was a lot of confusion. And so, it's a great thing, I think, that there's more discussion about them. So in that sense, there's more awareness, but I think also people are identifying like they might be engaging in these behaviors. And so I don't know if the prevalence is more that people have, like I said, the awareness, or if, certainly I think there's been discussion that certain things like TikTok and Instagram and things like that have also perpetuated, more of a culture, a toxic diet culture, if you will. So, it's kind of hard to know what's what, but for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? All we know is here we are. Well, what led you to be interested in the subject and working in the area of eating disorders and body image?
Well, it's interesting. I didn't really actually want to do this. I struggled with my own eating disorder starting like 11, 12 years old. And it was, it was a long haul for me. It was all consuming, and it was pretty severe. And I always knew from a young age I wanted to be in the medical field or help people. So I knew that part of my life was where I was heading for my career. But I'd always heard this myth that, especially for psychologists, that, there's these wounded warriors, and we always kind of make therapy about ourselves. And I was like, okay, I'm going to not touch eating disorders with a 10-foot pole, given my history. So I was like, okay, I'm going to work with couples and families. I have my master's degree in clinical psychology with an emphasis on marriage and family therapy. So I was like, all right, I'm going to just focus on couples and families, and I'm not going to touch eating disorders. But I was working at a hospital, and we always, do symptoms and assess for depression. And one of the symptoms of depression is, an increase or decrease in appetite. And it would inevitably come to the point where I'd get to that symptom. And I just remember one patient in particular that came in for an intake. We got there, and she just started talking about her food and intake, and she didn't have to say a whole lot. It was just like, I just understood her struggles, and there was just sense of relief on her face. Like, oh, you get it, And I think in order to really understand I guess I call it the ed voice, the eating disorder voice, or the things that go on in someone's life when you have an eating disorder, you kind of have had to go through it yourself, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to people. Even to my colleagues who've never had an eating disorder, eating disorders don't make a whole lot of sense. And so I found over time that a lot of patients were just feeling like, oh, you get it. And I recall back in my own treatment days, always kind of wishing I had a therapist like that, someone that kind of got it, because it's really hard to trust somebody and to do the things they're challenging you to do in treatment, because it's scary if you don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of fear, and you have to trust. And, it's just nice to have somebody like, hey, I've been there. You can do this. Like, I can walk the walk with you because I've been there myself. And so I thought, you know what, maybe I want to be the therapist I never had. So here we are all these years later, and I'm a certified eating disorder therapist. And so this is where I've specialized in, and actually really glad I decided to change my mind. So
that's pretty cool. Yes, I can totally see how the people who are struggling with it, having someone that they can really have the rapport and trust with because they understand it, would be so important for them. How many eating disorders are there, and what are they, and kind of a brief definition, or like what do they look like when someone's struggling with them?
So, there's the top three. So there's anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. That's in our diagnostic manual that we use. And then I don't want to get into the nuances of other diagnostic criteria, because let's just stick with the top three. So when you have anorexia nervosa, it's someone who's, I'll just give the overall. I'm not going to go through the whole diagnostic criteria because that'd be boring.
No,
but someone who has a real big fear of gaining weight, and they're usually restricting calories, and it may or may not lead to significantly low body weight. I think there's an idea out there that someone who has anorexia nervosa looks a certain way. And so I just want to actually put that out there, that we have something called atypical anorexia, where someone is in a much larger body. And so we look at the symptoms. What is somebody actually doing with their food? And then bulimia nervosa, it's a pattern of binge eating followed by compensatory behaviors with an attempt to prevent gaining weight. So they'll binge, and then they do something to try to undo the binge, if you will. So that could be over-exercising, self-induced vomiting, laxatives, diet pills, fasting, things like that. And then with binge eating disorder, it's repeatedly eating unusually large amounts of food in one single sitting, to the point of where they're physically feeling discomfort. And then after they're done, they feel really guilty. They kind of beat themselves up. And they really feel like they can't control that behavior.
What do you think is, or are, some of the leading factors that may lead someone to end up struggling with an eating disorder? Is it because that they're putting more emphasis on appearance when it comes to self-esteem or to body esteem? Like, what are some of these precipitating factors leading people to come to work with you?
I'm really glad you asked that, because I think there's a big myth out there that, eating disorders are about vanity or wanting to look good. And you can just kind of dispel that myth. There's a lot of causes. There's psychological, genetic, biological, social factors. There's not really one cause. And so it's just kind of like a perfect storm for people. And what I found is that everybody's got their own story and their own journey and their own, I guess, path to how they got there. There's not really one thing that says like, oh, it's this. So it's kind of complicated and complex.
This might be a weird question, but do people typically know that they're dealing with an eating disorder, or do sometimes people think this is just normal? Like, I've been tracking my calories and wanting to eat less for so long, or exercising after I eat too much. Like, I just thought that was normal. Do you ever have times where you're actually helping people understand that they're actually experiencing an eating disorder?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, to your first question, when you asked me about like social media and things like that, there is so much out there right now that is eating disorder because information. There's these quote unquote experts promoting eating disorder behaviors. And so it looks like that's quote unquote normal or quote unquote healthy. And that's one big thing that I have my own podcast to try to kind of like counteract that information and get the real information out there. So that if people, I have people on that have either had an eating disorder and are now in recovery or going through it, and have experts on there to try to get the information out there to say like, hey, if you're doing these things or you can relate to the people who are on here, take a step back and, really think like, maybe you are engaging in disordered eating or have an eating disorder. What you're doing is not quote unquote healthy, because I think a lot of people do think they're doing something healthy. And they're not. They actually do have an eating disorder. And certainly that was my experience. Is I really just thought, hey, I'm exercising, I'm doing something great, I'm trying to watch what I'm eating, I'm, doing all these things I'm supposed to be doing that I read in magazines, this and that. And I just thought I suck at dieting. I keep failing. I don't have enough willpower. I just need to try harder. Like, I was looking for like the holy grail of the diets to finally get to the point, where I weighed what I wanted to weigh and look like how I wanted to look. And I had no idea really that I had an eating disorder. So it was like a light bulb moment of like, what? Yeah.
What are some of those things that people may be seeing on Instagram or TikTok right now that you would say that is not actually healthy?
Yeah. So obsessively counting calories, making sure that they stick within a certain number of calories. I don't like to talk numbers, but I think, I've heard for the longest time, like, oh, if I eat less than 1,200, like I'm good. And I'm like, that's starvation. Like that's insane.
God,
right.
Yeah.
Cutting out certain, like a whole food group. Like I don't eat, carbs, eating to deal with feelings or for comfort, or being overly obsessed with their body shape and size, like call it like body checking. So like in every reflective like surface, like a mirror or wherever they're looking at themselves, they're lifting up their shirt, checking it, or they're obsessed with like weighing themselves, and the number on the scale really having an impact on like, their emotional state or how they feel about themselves. So if the number's up, they might feel bad. That will determine what they eat later that day or how much they exercise. And if it goes down, they'll be like elated for the moment. And then like, having that number really impacting your emotional state or how you feel about yourself is problematic. And people ask like the difference between disordered eating and having an eating disorder. So like engaging in some of these behaviors where it's like, you're trying to control your food and weight, and maybe obsessively exercising, things like that, really wanting to look a certain way is, you could have disordered eating. But when it gets to the point where it consumes your life and your whole life revolves around making sure you engage in these behaviors, and it actually just detracts from you being able to live your life. So people won't go to parties, say, because they won't have the ability to eat their meal plan or the things they allow themselves to eat, or they'll skip class if they're a student because they have to make sure they get their gym time in, or they skip on sleep because they have to get up early to make sure they go to the gym, or people will say, oh gosh, I can't go on vacation unless I make sure that the hotel has a gym because I have to work out every day. Or, ask people, how much of your day in your mind, do you think about food and body and all of this? And they'll say like, 80-90% of my mind is occupied with thoughts about all this. It's like, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Does it affect men at a rate similar to women, or is it more women?
It's so hard to tell, because I don't think a lot of men talk about it. And I also don't think that, they don't know. Like I've had a few men on my podcast, and, I think it's, how do I put this? I don't think they really believe that they have an eating disorder, because the myth out there, the stigma out there is like, it's something women have. And so I think the more education, the more information that's getting out there, the more men are opening up about it, the more we're realizing men do struggle as well.
Yeah. And what is at the core, is it a thought pattern that's keeping them stuck here? What is it that continues to drive the eating disorder? And then what changes in order for them to find freedom on the other side?
Well, it's really, at the basic level, it's a coping mechanism. It's like something feels out of control, whether it's emotions or something. And it's really a control mechanism. Like if I can control my food, if I can control my weight, if I can control this, then, I feel more in control of something, right? So it's an escape too, right? So think about if somebody's binging, they're escaping, they're numbing out, they're not thinking about whatever stress they had that day or whatever triggered that episode, right? Yeah. They're totally in another world. They're like dissociative for that moment. So they're just mindless. And that can also be comforting, right? Food can be a companion, a comfort, or whatever. So, but it also can give a sense of like, okay, maybe my emotions feel out of control, but when I'm counting calories and I'm going to the gym and I'm following this and I'm doing all these rituals, like I feel like something in my life, I'm in control. I can't let go of this control. The ironic thing about it is like when I ask people, okay, so you're in control of this, right? Yeah. Okay. Are you really, or is the eating disorder in control? Because if I ask somebody who has, say, anorexia nervosa, I'm like, if I handed you a cookie right now, could you eat it? Oh, no. I'm like, well, then you're not in control because you can't make the decision to eat the cookie. You're saying, no, I can't.
So then the intervention, what does it look like? Is it therapy? I mean, it probably also depends on the severity of a person, because I think I heard a couple months ago say how shockingly deadly anorexia is. Like people don't even really realize. So what does intervention look like?
Well, you're right. It depends on the severity. So if certainly I do outpatient treatment. So people are not at the level where they're at the risk of dying when they come. Well, if they might be actually, if somebody is really severe, I will send them to the emergency room or, I won't be working with them at my level. So it depends. If somebody has not been eating and doing some very risky behaviors with their eating disorder for a long time, or their body's malnourished, they may need to be on a feeding tube. They may need to be hospitalized. It just, again, it depends where they're at with it. If somebody just started, say, binging, and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm doing this. I just want to stop. That's a different level of treatment. Then we're talking about, okay, what triggered this new behavior? What's going on? That's a whole different level of treatment. And we do have different levels. We have, like I said, someone who needs to be medically stabilized. They're at risk for dying in that moment, and all the way down to like seeing somebody like myself where we're either working on preventing relapse, or we're trying to prevent them from going to a higher level of care.
Yeah. So what is the difference between eating disorders and body image issues?
Well, they're kind of related. So someone who maybe has like body dysmorphic disorder, for instance, which is this preoccupation with like, or obsessively thinking like something is wrong with their body that's not. So say somebody really believes that, if their life would be better if like they lost weight, and every time they look in the mirror, they really believe like their body's way too big and they need to lose weight and they're obsessed with it, something like that. Or it could be a different body part. It could be their nose, their forehead, whatever. There's this low self-esteem based on their external appearance in their body. Sometimes that can contribute and be a trigger to somebody leading into an eating disorder. So if they really believe like my body's too big, I don't like it, I will be happier once I look a certain way, and they start dieting, and then this can lead into eating disorder. But it's not necessarily like that's the cause, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So do you deal with people who come to you and are just like the body image is their issue, not necessarily an eating disorder?
And again, it depends. So I've definitely had people come in who were convinced that like some certain body part of theirs was contributing to why their life was miserable, or, oh gosh, I would be so much happier if like I got a nose job, or, I had better hair, or, it was like, it was all consuming and they were obsessed with this idea.
Yeah. How do you balance the line of work that you do with someone wanting to be a healthy weight, someone wanting to have healthy eating habits, a healthy exercise plan, and there's kind of a lot happening in social media all the time, but there's a lot happening in social media with kind of the two extremes. The one we already talked about, which is the people promoting probably some very unhealthy eating plans. So I will say, I was on a Instagram last night and there was some kind of ad about a jogging, like a running plan. And so I was seeing if I wanted to do this and how do you take this quiz? And then it said, would you like to add an eating plan to it too? And I was like, oh, this will be interesting. Sure. And it had me answer some questions and it said, you can lose 7 pounds in the next 4 weeks. And I was like, first of all, no, I can't. I mean, I probably could, but that would be super unhealthy. And then I looked at the plan and it was exactly what you said. It's like, all you have to do is eat 11 to 1300 calories a day. And I was like, there's not a chance. There's not a way in the world that I could do that, which I know now. I mean, when I was younger, I probably had been like, yeah, that's all I have to do. But I am very active. I do, work out a lot, and the body needs a lot of calories. But a lot of girls I work out with at the gym, they're like, I just can't eat more than 1400 calories. And so there's that aspect. But then maybe there's also the aspect of, is it healthy to just kind of say, well, this is how I am, and I don't need to work out or do anything because it is good to think you're healthy and lovable as you are, of course, but like, where is that line in between of loving our bodies and wanting it to be healthy? And what should that look like in a healthy scenario?
Well, so I think that so whenever I hear the word healthy, I gotta cringe. I'm like, like,
what
right?
Healthy?
Yeah, I think that's where I start with people, is kind of saying like, let's get rid of the labels, right? Once people start having these dichotomous like categories of healthy food and unhealthy food, or good food, bad food, that's where it kind of all starts, right? Because then food becomes something other than it's meant to be. Food is fuel and nutrition for the body, first and foremost. We have lost sight of that. Like, let's call it out what it is. That's all it is. But we've made it so much more. There's like these moralistic, like emotional ties to food. Like, if I eat this food and I determine it's in my mind bad, now I feel bad for eating it. Right? If I eat this food, it's good. I'm good. And I find that a lot of people who come see me have these lists. And what I really found is that quote unquote healthy, good foods are the foods they've labeled as like, I'm not going to gain weight if I eat these foods, and then I feel okay and good. And the other foods they've labeled as bad or unhealthy are the foods that they feel bad and guilty for eating. And they are like, oh, these are the weight gaining foods. I have to stay away from these. These are my fear foods. And so a lot of work is done on like, just, food is food. Let's get rid of the label. Like, right. Cause that's the diet mentality. Really, it's like, I'm going to eat these foods and not these. And then if I eat these, I'm indulgent, I'm bad. I'm going to deprive myself of these bad foods and then only eat these. But then the problem is that when you're depriving yourself of the foods you really want to eat, you end up kind of overeating them or binging them or cheating on them, whatever you want to call it later. That's really having this really imbalanced relationship with food. So I think that just having an idea and a discussion with people about like, what do you think about food? Like, right? And people have all sorts of rules too, just really uncovering like, how were you raised with food? Like, did your parents make you eat everything on your plate? Even to the point where you lost touch with your hunger and satiety signals. Do you even know what you feel like when you're hungry or when you're no longer hungry? Because I find a lot of people feel like hunger is starving because they've dieted so much and they don't know what actual hunger feels like. So it's a lot of just getting in touch with like, you know, your instinctive, innate like need for fuel and nutrition first, and getting down to like the basics with things. And the same with exercise. And I had this whole podcast where I talked about like who tied exercise and food together. They're two separate things. You know, because that's a really bulimic kind of notion, if you will. It's like, oh, I eat this and I got to work this off. Like exercise's purpose is not weight loss. But so many people look at it like that. And that's really interesting to me. It's like, wait a minute, that's not the purpose of exercise. What is the purpose? And so a lot of discussion about that too is like, why do you want to exercise? Because then the notion is too, is like, oh, I eat this. If I don't exercise, I'm going to feel bad. Or there's this idea of like, I have to exercise in order to lose weight. And then people don't want to do it. It's not fun.
Right. Because in their mind, they're probably tying it to kind of like as a punishment. Yeah, that makes total sense. I've never actually consciously thought about it. They are two different things, but we do absolutely tie them together.
But it's everywhere. Like you said in social media, it's like diet and exercise, right? And even medical doctors say that to people like, oh, exercise more, eat less. And it's like, what are we doing? Hold on.
Yeah.
Like that's, you know, because that's part of the eating disorder mind too. A lot of times I call it negotiating with Ed. People say, oh, I didn't exercise today, so therefore I'm negotiating, meaning I'm going to eat less later. I have to earn my food. If I exercise, I can earn my food later, or what I eat later is dependent on if I exercised or not, or how much I exercised. And that's really toxic.
Yeah, I can see that. Let's talk we were chatting a little bit before we started recording about the new trend that's kind of happening in weight loss drugs. What's going on? Can you give us the down low?
I would love to know why this is going on. Well, I have my ideas. So these semaglutide medications like Ozempic and Mounjaro, and there's more popping up. God. I always sit back and go, what's the next thing in the 15 minutes of fame in the diet culture? But like, here we go. These medications came out for people who have type 2 diabetes, right? And if anyone's seen the commercials or heard them when they first came out, it said one of the side effects, one of the things that could happen is weight loss, right? They're usually these things that are not good, things that are like, you don't want to have happen, right? But what happened was all these, people who have platforms, celebrities, whatever, started coming out and saying like, oh, I'm taking this and I lost weight. This is great, right? Great. And so now, instead of these medications being touted as type 2 diabetes drugs, I'm hearing them touted as, look in the media, weight loss drugs. And people are taking them who don't have type 2 diabetes, which is a problem for people who have type 2 diabetes, can't get the medications. But two, they're very expensive. And so, from my understanding now, doctors are, prescribing them for quote unquote weight loss reasons now to get them covered. But big pharma is making a lot of money, so you have to look at this too and say like, what's happening? Why is this such a big thing now? What's the big push?
So doctors are just prescribing them. Like you can't get them without a prescription, or
No.
can you?
Mm-mm.
So you have to have a prescription. And so doctors are prescribing type 2 diabetes medication to people who don't have type 2 diabetes.
For reasons for weight loss, which is interesting to me because it's never have I ever heard that losing weight is a treatment for any illness, like ever. I don't, never, because people of all shapes, sizes, whatever, have illnesses. I mean, I know people of all weights who have illnesses, and it's interesting to me that only people in larger bodies get told lose weight for this illness, but people in smaller bodies who have the same illness don't get told lose weight. So what's going on here? It's weird to me. Awful. Interesting.
I know I have a friend who had a family member taking that, one of those. I don't remember which one. And she has lost so much weight that she is like lost down to like under 100 pounds, lost so much weight. And it's not good, like having to go to a liver specialist and all the things for, and I think it's hard, especially when people want to feel thin. And this probably goes back to what we were talking to with body image and eating disorders. Like one of the things that we've kind of been talking about is it that she is unwilling to stop taking this because she's at this point been unwilling because she likes being thin for the first time. And she was overweight first, but like it's wreaking havoc on her health. So, it's causing some more of the issues that you're even talking about.
Well, I love that you said that, right? It's like weight loss. Sorry, I lose my mind with this because it's like weight loss at the cost of your physical health and well-being, right? It's like we're saying weight loss above all else. Let's make people very sick and cause all sorts of problems, which they know causes problems. They've said it, they're like, there's problems with our digestive systems. There's all these things that are coming out now. Like, just go and read it. And they're coming out with things even, like they're calling it like Ozempic face and Ozempic butt and all these things that I've read. And like, it absolutely shocks me when I'm reading these things. Like, oh, well, just, to take care of this, just get plastic surgery, just get a facelift. Just, I'm like, oh my God, spend thousands of more dollars on these side effects because now people are upset that they have a saggy face because when you lose weight, you get a saggy face or this. I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? All we're saying is the whole goal is to look great, right? Like get plastic surgery. It's like, and here's the problem, right? They've even said you can't stay on these medications for, I think, more than 16 or 18 months, right? I think that's about it. And so when we know this, when people go off the medication, the weight comes back. So what happens then? Now you've done damage to your body, your internal body. You've done damage to your external body with this, your skin. And then what? What are you left with?
Yeah. What would you say to someone who is listening to this and maybe thinking, I have been doing some of these things. Either I know that I'm struggling with an eating disorder, or based on what y'all have been talking about, I am really, obsessive about my food and how I look and how much I exercise after I eat something I feel like I'm quote unquote not supposed to. What would you encourage those people to do as a next step?
So I always encourage people to kind of take a real hard look at like, how much is this all consuming your life? Is it having a detrimental impact on your relationships, your work, school? And then, I always encourage people to, if you feel like this might be a problem, get a formal assessment from somebody. Don't wait, because what we know is the sooner you get intervention and treatment, the better the outcome for getting into recovery. And these aren't diseases and illnesses you want to really wait on. We would say like they're very quick to get you to a place of, getting in the danger zone. And so I always encourage people, just go get assessed by a professional. If you have the illness, like I said, earlier treatment's better. These are deadly illnesses. These are not things to mess around with. They have an effect on your physiological well-being, your emotional well-being, like all aspects of your life really get touched by having an eating disorder. And this, you can get help, you can get better. So I really encourage people to do that.
Yeah, that's good. Now, when you say get assessed by a professional, like who? Do they go to a psychologist, to a counselor, to some kind of doctor? Where should people look?
So I will say this: medical doctors notoriously are not great with understanding eating disorders. Unfortunately, medical school doesn't have any education on eating disorders, which is shocking to me since. Like when I worked at a hospital for 15 years, and I could not find one primary care physician to work in tandem with me to treat eating disorder patients or monitor them, which is shocking. They just were like, didn't understand them, didn't want to touch it. It was just horrible. Yeah. So I often say, look for a specialist. There are specialists like myself who did the coursework and did this specialized training to become certified and really understand the nuances of having an eating disorder. Psychologists, of course, are, they've done a lot of work and a lot of training, but understanding an eating disorder is just such a different illness. So you really want to work with a specialist if possible.
Yeah, that's good. Where can people find more about what you do, your podcast, all the things?
Thank you for asking. I'm at behindthebitepodcast.com. That's the website. The podcast is on all the podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Sketcher, all those. And then I'm on Instagram at Behind the Bite Podcast. So, yeah. I'm all out there. So, yeah.
Awesome. We'll link to all of those things in the show notes too, so that people can have easy access to them, as well as to your podcast, which, fellow podcaster, that's my favorite medium to consume content. I don't know about you, but it's definitely mine. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it in this medium. So I'll definitely link to that as well. Dr. Cristina, I appreciate you being on the show and talking about this. I hope that it helps many people and that they begin to take steps towards healing and freedom from eating disorders. I appreciate the work you're doing.
Well, I appreciate the work you're doing, and I appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Here is my key takeaway from today's episode. The things that we think about ourselves make a huge impact on the way that we treat ourselves. When we believe that we are not good enough, or not thin enough, or not strong enough, or not whatever it might be, then it can become unhealthy, and we can place aspects of our esteem in those areas and want those things to change. And it can lead us to have some very unhealthy habits. There's several different body esteem scales in the psychological literature. And one of them talks about the 3 different areas of body esteem for men and the 3 different areas of body esteem for women. And for women, off the top of my head, I believe it is sexual attractiveness, which is true for both of them. Both men and women, sexual attractiveness is one of those areas. And those are things like hair, body scent, different things like that. Appearance of certain parts of the body would fall under sexual attractiveness. And then there is, for men, upper body strength is something that they really look at in terms of, and care about in terms of looking and placing value, so to say, in different areas of their body, or how they feel about different areas of their body. Whereas women, the area that it's different is weight concern. So women tend to be more concerned overall about their weight and the appearance of their body in relationship to other areas of the body, like having a smaller hip to waist ratio than, or, a smaller waist than hips. Different things like that, having a larger chest than waist, right? These are some of the things that women look at when they're evaluating their own bodies. And then again, both men and women tend to both look at overall physical appearance. And that breaks down into several different components as well, such as strength and, athletic condition and all of that kind of stuff, which we won't get into. The whole reason I'm saying this is these are areas that consciously or subconsciously, probably more consciously than not, we're looking at and evaluating ourselves and our worth in these areas, which can lead us to have some of these unhealthy behaviors, such as restricting what we eat, going on this yo-yo dieting mindset, or having the all or nothing mindset, which I talked to Amanda Nybert, who's a registered dietitian, about in last year. We'll link to that episode in the show notes as well. is when we feel like something is off limits to us, then our psyche kind of wants to rebel, and it can keep us stuck in that cycle of the yo-yo dieting or whatever you might want to call it. Also, I thought it was a great point that nutrition and exercise, they are two different things. We exercise, or at least should exercise, to get stronger, to improve our aerobic capacity. Weight loss is typically something that can come from that, but really our nutrition is a large part of where that comes from. So my question for you today is, are you struggling in any of these areas, or do you know someone who is, especially a child? And women, men too, but especially women, moms, think about how you're talking about yourself in front of your daughters and even in front of your sons. Fathers, you may want to think about the way you're talking about muscle size or height or different things that are part of your body in front of your sons, because it can perpetuate that mindset of, am I good enough? Do I look good enough? Even with just our daughters or our sons looking at us and watching the way we talk about our bodies, or how we are occupied or maybe preoccupied with thinking about our bodies. So that's a key takeaway I have for you today. If you've enjoyed this episode and believe it would be beneficial to someone else, please take a minute to share it. And if you would, please leave a review of the podcast wherever you listen. It really helps us to reach even more people. Until next week, stay strong.